Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our Wednesday night class. Nice to see everyone. Tonight we are studying Parashat Vayechi, and we are studying the last Torah portion in the book of Genesis. Mazel Tov, we're finished learning the first book. Yet again, we'll get back to it next year. And now we are going to, next week, start Bezrat Hashem Parashat Shemot. Okay. This week just tells us about the roundup of Jacob's life, Jacob passing away, him blessing his children, his grandchildren, and obviously one of the main episodes in this week's Torah portion is Jacob blessing his grandchildren, Menashe and Ephraim. Those are Joseph's two sons that he had in Egypt. So let's look at a couple of verses over here. Okay. The verse says as follows. Chapter 48, verse 5. He says, and now, as for your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt until I came to you, to the land of Egypt, they are mine. Ephraim Menashe Kir'uven v'Shimon Yuli. Ephraim and Menashe shall be mine, like Reuben and Shimon. So that's the first verse. And in other words, Jacob's telling his son Joseph that his two sons are at the same level. They're going to be his at the same level of Reuben and Shimon. Basically, as the commentaries say, Yaakov literally made Ephraim and Menashe his own children in every way, meaning that they would be tribes in their own right. We're going to get to that. The next verse, verse 6. But your children that you any of them that you have afterwards will be yours. By their brothers' names they shall be called in their inheritance. So, in other words, if Joseph were going to have more children, we know he didn't, but if he would have had more children, those children would not be tribes in their own right. Only Ephraim and Menashe would be tribes. Do we have another verse? Okay, let's start with that. So Reb Leib, after quoting these psukim, he quotes the famous Rashi that tells us that Jacob now made it that Ephraim and Menashe would also inherit land in Israel like any other tribe. And Reb Leib says that he didn't just bless Menashe and Ephraim with honor. He actually established them to be counted as tribes, and he also changed their entire essence by blessing them. He recreated them, Reb Leib says. And now, how does he prove this? Reb Leib says right afterwards, the verse establishes them to be his own sons. Look what the verse says. This is in chapter 48, verse 7. Va'ani bevoimi padan meta alai Rachel be'eretz Kenan b'derech Efrat be'od kivrat eretz lavo Efrata. He says, as for me, when I came from Paddan, Rachel died to me in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was still a stretch of land to come to Efrat. And I buried her there on the way to Efrat, which is Bet Lechem. So he explains, Reb Leib says that Jacob explains that his wife died and was buried on his way back to Israel. And then the Torah goes and continues to make the point of how Jacob actually blesses Menashe and Ephraim. And this is going to be the last verse we're going to look at now. This is verse 8. Vayar Yisrael et bnei Yosef vayomer mi'ele. And Israel then saw Joseph's sons and says, who are these? Who are these? Rashi says, Yaakov looked at them and he wanted to bless them. But at the moment that he wanted to bless them, God's presence, his Shekhinah, escaped him, and he couldn't bless them until Yosef asked, why are you not blessing them? And then he responds by telling them, who are these people? Who are these kids? And he says, they're my children. So then he went along and he, I guess, agreed to bless him. But now the question is, and Rashi asks this, why was Yosef hesitant? Why was Yaakov hesitant about blessing Menashe and Ephraim? I mean, it seems like from before he was just preparing to bless them. Oh, now he's hesitant? So what happened was Yaakov looked at these two children, Rashi says, and he saw they each had one day wicked descendants that would come from them. From Ephraim, there was going to be Yeravam and Achav, which were unfortunately very, very, very negative influences and leaders of the Jewish people, specifically Yeravam, which the Rambam compares Yeravam ben Avat to be the nemesis, not really the nemesis, but the exact opposite of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu fulfilling his 100% potential, and Yeravam completely losing out on all of his potential. Yeravam was one of the kings of Israel, and very, very, very sad story of the way he caused the masses to worship idolatry in the most horrible way. And then Yehu and his children were all descendants of Menashe, which were also extremely, extremely negative for the Jewish people. So Rashi says, since Yaakov looked at his grandchildren and saw these wicked descendants, he lost the presence of God and he was not able to bless them. Reb Leib says, originally, he asks the following. He says, originally when Yaakov proclaimed these boys, just a couple of verses before, to be like his own sons, why didn't Yaakov see at that point, either before that or during that, these wicked descendants? Again, how did the verses play out? He makes his grandchildren like his own children, those two. He makes them to be tribes. He gives them that benefit. He says then any other child that's born after you, for you, Joseph, they're going to be under these boys. They're not going to be tribes in their own right. Then he tells us that he lost Rachel on his way back to Israel, and then he says he comes to bless them. He doesn't know who they are. Why? Because he sees that they're going to have wicked descendants. What's going on over here? What changed all of a sudden? So, Reb Leib explains a fascinating concept. He says a blessing should not be taken lightly, especially from Yaakov Avinu, Jacob the patriarch. A blessing, Reb Leib says, really is an addition. Something is actually changing. And after Yaakov established Menashe and Ephraim to be tribes and blessed them, what he did was, well, that in itself was a blessing before the main blessing, but when he lifted them up and he changed their status to actually be tribes, what he did was he added to them special spiritual powers and potentials that they did not have previously. Only then, explains Reb Leib, when Yaakov Avinu made these boys to be tribes, that's when he was able to see their descendants. Why? He says because before they were established, before they were blessed to be tribes in their own right, they weren't going to have such wicked descendants. It was only when they were uplifted to the level of tribes and blessed to be tribes were they supercharged with powers, special powers. But like everything in life, there has to be a balance. And just as their good side was supercharged, now they were going to be tribes in their own right. Unfortunately, their negative, their bad also was supercharged to keep an equal equilibrium and a clear balance. He proves this from the Talmud. The Talmud says, Kol hagadol mechavero yitzro gadol hamino, that whoever is greater, whoever is more righteous than their fellow, they also have a stronger evil inclination. It's stronger Yetzer Hara. Because if the Yetzer Tov is very strong, then it's not fair. It's going to beat the Yetzer Hara every single time. So in order to keep it in check, the greater a person gets, the stronger the Yetzer Hara gets. Even though the Yetzer Hara gets stronger, they do have more tools to overcome it and channel it, but the Yetzer Hara still grows. So only, Reb Leib says, only when these children were raised to be tribes and blessed with that greatness, Only at that point were they granted descendants that were going to be so wicked. That was going to be the negative addition that they were going to get. So when Yaakov now blesses Menashe and Ephraim, he places his hands. So Yosef pleads, please bless them. He agrees. And Yaakov places his hands on their heads. And when he did so, we learn something. We can learn a very strong similarity to something that was done in the future by Moshe Rabbeinu. You see, when Moshe Rabbeinu was blessing Joshua to take on his own position, he did something similar. Look at this. This is in Numbers chapter 27, verses 22 and 23. Vayas Moshe ka'asher tziva Hashem oto, and Moshe did as the Lord commanded him. Vayikach et Yoshua v'yamideu lifnei Elazar HaKohen v'lifnei kol ha'edah, and he took Joshua, presented him in front of Elazar the Kohen, and before the entire congregation. What did he do? Next verse, Vayismoch et yadav alav vaytzaveu. He laid his hands upon him and commanded him, Kasher diber Hashem biad Moshe, as God told Moshe to do. The Talmud tells us, and if we go back, really Rashi says, Rashi originally commanded Moshe Rabbeinu to put one hand on Joshua's head, to bless him and to give him pass on the mantle that he would now be the new leader. But what did Moshe do? Moshe Rabbeinu put both of his hands on Joshua's head. And he did this in order to show that he is wholeheartedly stepping down from his position as God commanded him to do so, and to pass on that position to Yoshua. And then Rashi ends off, and I quote, V'darshu Chazal, and our great sages teach us, Asaol maleh chokhmah, what he did was he made Yoshua full of wisdom, Ichli maleh v'gadush, as a vessel that is full up to the brim. Reb Leib says from this Rashi a fascinating thing. He says we can prove that when a hand is placed on someone else when you're blessing them, whether it be your student, whether it be your child, your grandchild, and when your hand is being placed on someone as appointing them, it actually makes the person a new vessel. It raises them to a higher status. This is exactly what was happening to Joshua with Menashe and Ephraim. This is what happened to Joshua just as it happened to Menashe and Ephraim. When Yaakov put his hands on Menashe and Ephraim, he raised them to literally a different being. They became different people. They became tribes now. When Moshe Rabbeinu put his hands on Yoshua, Rashi's telling us he made him new. He made him full of wisdom. He made him a completely new person. A beautiful proof to this concept, Reb Leib says, can also be found later in our Torah. In Parashat Shelach, when the Jewish people were preparing to send spies into the land of Israel, they wanted to tour the chosen land. And all of the spies were listed. And as we can guess, there was one spy per tribe. Take a look at this on your screen. For the tribe of Menashe, this is in Numbers chapter 13, verse 8. Lemate Ephraim Hoshea bin Nun. For the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea, the son of Nun. This was Yoshua before he got the Yud. A couple verses later, verse 11. Lemate Yosef, Lemate Menashe. For the tribe of Joseph, for the tribe of Menashe, Gadi, the son of Susi. Asks Reb Leib, which honestly bothered me many, many years. Many years I was reading this Torah portion, and it always bothered me. Why is it for Ephraim, it just doesn't say any relation to Joseph? But for the tribe of Menashe, it says, for the tribe of Joseph, for the tribe of Menashe, there is a relation to the tribe of Joseph. Again, look at your screen. When it's the Ephraim, it's just the tribe of Ephraim. When it's the tribe of Menashe, it's really the tribe of Menashe that's part of the tribe of Joseph. Why would it do that? Either tribe of Joseph or both, or list them one after another. They're not even listed one after another. There's 3 verses in between them. Like, why is it exactly the Torah doing it as such? So Reb Leib answers a beautiful answer. And by the way, again, like I said, this was a question I had many, many years. He says, based on what we said, that that Menashe and Ephraim were raised to such high levels. Yoshua himself was not a part of Yosef. Yoshua was part of the tribe of Ephraim directly, a direct descendant of Yaakov. It would be so to say, Yaakov's own child was Ephraim. Because if Yaakov would not have lifted Ephraim up to that high level of a tribe, not only wouldn't have had those negative descendants, as we said, those wicked descendants, but he also would have never had Yoshua. Ephraim would have never had a descendant of Yoshua, who also came from him. So Yeravam and Achav would have never been his descendants, but also Yoshua would not have been his descendants. So now, what about Menashe? Well, Menashe was also raised to a tribe. Why is he associated with Yosef? Because the Torah tells us that Yaakov took Ephraim, the younger of the two, and he raised him, and he said he will be greater than his brother. And so it was. So in some way, Menashe, even though he was raised to be a tribe, he still had some association to Joseph. So therefore, when his descendant is mentioned, Gadi ben Susi, it was Lemate Yosef, Lemate Menashe. But Ephraim was raised to such a high level that he had like a direct child of Yaakov. And therefore his name is not mentioned in association with Joseph because he was raised to a higher level. That's why Yoshua was the greatest, one of the greatest, and he came from Ephraim. Menashe didn't have such a great descendant. But also Ephraim's descendants of Yeravam and Achav were way worse than Yehu. Again, always to keep a balance. As much as greatness is, there's also an equal amount of negativity or wickedness, or at least the potential of it. And then what happens is all, again, free will. So the two lessons I took out from this fascinating teaching from Reb Leib Heyman is following. Number one is don't take blessings lightly, especially when it's blessings from your parents and your grandparents and your elders, your rabbis. Don't ever take blessings lightly. Look at this blessing that Yaakov is doing. Yaakov is taking his own grandchildren, is making them like his own children, in not only just honoring them, but their real inheritance, their real position forevermore in the tribes, in Klal Yisrael. It's something that we should not take lightly. The Talmud says you should never take lightly anyone's blessing, even someone who looks like a Nebuch, an unfortunate individual, even a wicked person who blesses you. A blessing is a blessing is a blessing is a blessing. We always welcome blessings. Now, obviously, the greater the person is that is blessing you, the greater merit, potential merit, and reality that can come from it there is. And we all take that seriously and we welcome them. That's number one. Number two is we have to remember that everything in life has to be, I call it, fair. There's always a trade-off for everything. Wealth, wisdom, success, and all great things. There is a price to pay for everything. And we have to be aware of that. We have to be aware that there's a price to pay for wealth, for wisdom, for success. Be aware of what that price is and then evaluate, is it still worth it? For example, there is a price to pay to become wise. It's an investment of time, it's an investment of learning, it's an investment of opening your mind and mental exercise and experience and being willing to go through the experience and learning from your mistakes. Are you, now that you know what it's going to take, the price that you're going to have to pay for it, do you still want to proceed? Now, hopefully, yes. The answer with all wisdom is yes. You do want to pay that price. Wealth and success. There is a price to pay to be wealthy. There's a price to pay to be successful. It could be being diligent and persistent and not giving up, investing and risking certain things in order to gain more. These are all prices to pay that we have to know if we want to pay them in order to attain that. Raising children, right? Raising children is also an amazing thing. But there's a price to pay to raise children, as we all know. But it's still something we're willing to go through. But we always need to just be aware in order that we can decide. There always has to be a balance. So for Ephraim, there was a gain. The gain was Yeshua. There was also, unfortunately, a loss. And that loss was having those wicked children, those wicked descendants. And Hashem did say that was going to be the way that it was supposed to be. But for us, we have to know that everything is equal. There is a fairness. There is an equality. God understands. It's all in God's divine understanding. But we just, again, on our end, have to realize that all good things come with a price. And believe it or not, for example, when it comes to Torah and mitzvot and wisdom, that price that we pay in investing the time and mental energy in amassing and gaining wisdom all goes to our credit. And the same is for any type of success. All of that time that we invest in attaining that success is more experience, and it's all to our credit. The question is do we want to pay the price in order to attain whatever it is that we want to attain? There's no shortcuts in life. That's the idea. Yeshua was a descendant of Ephraim because he was raised to be a tribe, but there's no shortcut. There was something that we're going to have to give, and that was the other wicked descendants that Ephraim had. May God bless us, that we will always succeed. We will always be blessed. We will take blessings from our parents, our grandparents, from our ancestors, and that B'ezrat Hashem we will succeed in all ways, in many ways, through the guidance of our Torah. Thank you very much for joining us.